There comes a moment in your life when your soul can no longer bear the silence of heaven. You pray, but it feels as if your words bounce back to you. You ask for answers, but the air feels heavy with the confusion. You kneel before God, but you sense no response, no whisper, no peace. And you begin to wonder, why can I not hear God? But I tell you today, it is not that God is silent. It is that too much noise has filled your soul. The voice of God is not absent. It is drowned out by the clutter of habits that keep you spiritually deaf. God still speaks, but many have lost the sensitivity to hear Him. The voice of God is not a shout. It is not the roar of thunder or the cry of the wind. It is a still small voice, pure, steady, powerful, enough to change your destiny, but only if your heart is still enough to listen. So many pray, but few prepare their hearts to hear. And that is why today I must tell you, if you truly want to hear the voice of God clearly, there are habits you must quit. There are things in your life that silence the divine whisper, that harden your heart, that dim the light of spiritual clarity. You cannot keep walking with the world and expect to hear from heaven. You cannot fill your mind with noise and expect divine direction. You cannot entertain sin and expect the Spirit to speak. The first habit you must quit is the habit of constant complaint. Complaint is the language of those who have forgotten who is in control. Every time you murmur, you cloud your own soul. When you complain, you declare to heaven that you do not trust God's timing or His wisdom. You shut the gates of revelation because your words build walls between you and the divine. God does not speak clearly to a heart filled with bitterness, resentment, and negativity. When your heart is full of complaint, it becomes impossible to discern His whisper because His voice always flows through gratitude. The grateful heart hears what the ungrateful ear cannot. When you choose gratitude, the voice of God grows louder because your spirit aligns with His goodness. Gratitude opens the heavens. Complaint closes them. The second habit you must quit is the habit of rushing. Too many people pray in a hurry, live in a hurry, think in a hurry, and then wonder why they cannot hear God. You cannot hear divine instruction in a restless spirit. God's voice is never birthed in chaos. He speaks in silence, in stillness, in the quiet rhythm of surrender. When you rush, you drown out revelation. When you hurry through prayer, you treat God like an appointment instead of a relationship. The voice of God is not discovered by those who sprint. It is revealed to those who wait. Waiting is the womb of wisdom. If you cannot wait, you will never hear. The impatient heart is deaf to the eternal. But when you quiet yourself before Him, when you sit in holy stillness, something begins to change. Your mind becomes clear, your emotions settle, your spirit awakens, and in that holy stillness, His voice breaks through like the morning light after a long night. The third habit you must quit is the habit of sin you keep excusing. You cannot walk in rebellion and expect divine revelation. Many want God to speak, but they refuse to obey what He has already said. They pray for new instructions while ignoring the old ones. But God does not waste His voice on disobedience. Until you lay down what He told you to lay down, you will not hear what He wants to tell you next. Sin is not just an act, it is a barrier. It builds a wall between you and the divine whisper. When you hold on to sin, your conscience becomes dull. You stop recognizing the inner correction of the Spirit. And when that sensitivity is lost, even the loudest warning from heaven sounds like a silence. Purity sharpens perception. The cleaner your heart, the clearer His voice. You must quit the sin that numbs you. confess it, abandon it. And you will find that God has been speaking all along. You are just too spiritually deaf to hear. The fourth habit you must quit is the habit of fear. Fear is a voice too, and it often speaks louder than faith. Fear distorts perception. It twists what God says and makes you doubt what you already know. Every time you give in to fear, you empower confusion. God does not speak through anxiety. He speaks through faith. The fearful mind cannot discern His words because fear makes noise in the soul. It magnifies uncertainty, builds scenarios, and fills your imagination with shadows. Fear is a thief. It steals revelation. You cannot hear the calm whisper of heaven when you are listening to the storm of your own thoughts. You must quit feeding your fear with negative thinking, with overanalyzing, with worry. Replace those thoughts with trust. Tell yourself, God knows, God leads, God provides. When fear leaves, clarity comes. When trust rises, the fog lifts and the voice of God breaks through the confusion like the dawn after a long night. The fifth habit you must quit is the habit of comparison. So many lose their hearing in the noise of competition. You cannot compare yourself with others and still hear what God is saying to you. God does not repeat Himself. He speaks uniquely to every soul. When you are busy studying someone else's path, you lose sight of your own. Comparison makes you deaf to destiny. You start seeking validation instead of direction. You start following opinions instead of revelation. And before you know it, you are lost, not because God stopped speaking, but because you stopped listening. You must quit comparing your journey, your timing, your blessings, your trials. When you stop measuring your life by others, you make room for divine guidance. God speaks most clearly to the heart that is content in His will. The sixth habit you must quit is the habit of spiritual laziness. Many want to hear God, but few want to discipline their spirits to listen. You cannot live in distraction and expect revelation. You cannot spend hours feeding your mind with the world and then give God 5 minutes and expect to hear eternity speak. The voice of God requires attention, devotion, and pursuit. The lazy spirit always wants shortcuts to revelation. But hearing God is not accidental, it is intentional. You must cultivate it through prayer, through stillness, through surrender. The more you seek, the clearer it becomes. The more you draw near, the louder the whisper sound. The more you practice His presence, the more familiar His tone becomes. The secret of the spiritual giants was never that they were special. It was that they were consistent. They quieted their minds until only one voice remained, the voice of God. Now listen carefully. These 6 habits are not just behaviors, they are spiritual blockages. Every complaint hardens your heart. Every rush clouds your spirit. Every hidden sin silences your conscience. Every fear distorts your faith. Every comparison breaks your focus. Every laziness weakens your sensitivity. And together they create the perfect storm of spiritual deafness. You cannot hear God in that state. You may pray, you may read, you may worship, but it all feels dry because your soul is not still enough to listen. You must remove the noise. You must unclog the channel between you and the heaven. You must cleanse your heart until only the sound of God remains. When you quit these habits, something extraordinary happens. Your prayers begin to feel alive. Your spirit becomes alert. You begin to sense divine nudges in ordinary moments. You walk into situations and feel guided without effort. You wake up with a clarity you never had before. God begins to direct your step, not through thunderous commands, but through gentle impressions, divine coincidences, and quiet knowing. You start hearing what others miss because your spirit has become tuned to His frequency. You discover that His voice was never far, it was always within, waiting for you to be quiet enough to listen. Some of you today are asking for direction, but God is waiting for purification. You say, God, speak to me. But He says, remove the noise first. You want the revelation, but you are unwilling to let go of distraction. You want clarity, but your mind is full of opinions, doubts, and desires that are not aligned with His will. You must make room for the voice of God. He will not compete with your idols. He will not shout over your noise. He will not wrestle with your distractions. He waits for surrender. When you finally silence the world within you, the world within you begin to speak. Hearing God is not about volume, it is about proximity. The closer you walk with Him, the clearer His whisper becomes. Many want to hear God while living far from Him, but distance dulls the spirit. You cannot walk in disobedience, pride, or distraction and still expect divine communication. You must return to intimacy. You must live in the awareness that God is always near, always speaking, always guiding. His voice is not rare, your attention is. His presence is not distant, your focus is. The more you train your heart to recognize Him, the more naturally you begin to hear. You must also understand God's voice is not only heard through words, it is heard through peace. When you are walking in His will, there is a deep sense of stillness within you. That stillness is the language of heaven. Sometimes God will not speak through thunder, but through calm. Sometimes the greatest revelation will come not as a word, but as a knowing, a deep assurance that you are exactly where you should be. That peace is proof of His presence. But when you entertain the 6 habits we spoke of: complaint, rushing, sin, fear, comparison, and laziness, that peace vanishes. You become restless, anxious, and unsure. That is why hearing God clearly is impossible without inner stillness. There is a reason God speaks softly so that only those who truly desire Him will hear. His whisper is a test of hunger. He hides His voice in stillness so that only the desperate will find it. Those who are casual with God never hear Him deeply. Those who pursue Him passionately recognize His whisper even in the noise. You must become desperate again. You must say, God, I do not want to move without your voice. I do not want to decide without your counsel. I do not want to live without your direction. That desperation opens heaven. The more you hunger for Him, the clearer His voice becomes. Some of you are living in confusion today, not because God has left you, but because you have stopped listening. The habits you've tolerated have become your spiritual enemies. But the moment you quit them, the moment you surrender your complaint, your hurry, your hidden sin, your fear, your comparison, your laziness, something shifts. The static clears, the fog lifts, the whisper grows strong again. You begin to discern His will with accuracy. You start to walk in peace instead of confusion. You stop guessing and start knowing. You stop striving and start flowing. That is what it means to hear God clearly, not through thunder, but through peace. Not through emotion, but through conviction. Not through chaos, but through clarity. And when you begin to hear His voice, everything changes. You stop wasting time on things that do not matter. You stop fearing the future because you are guided by wisdom beyond your own. You stop worrying about what others think because you know what God has said. Your life becomes steady. Your spirit becomes fearless. Your purpose becomes clear. The voice of God brings direction, protection, and elevation. It transforms confusion into confidence, weakness into strength, wandering into destiny. It is the greatest treasure a human soul can possess, to walk every day knowing that the Creator Himself is guiding your steps. But remember this truth: the same God who speaks is the same God who tests. He will not speak to a heart that refuses correction. He will not reveal the next step until you obey the last instruction. Many want divine guidance without divine discipline, but obedience sharpens your ears. The more you obey, the more you hear. Every act of surrender amplifies His voice. Every act of disobedience mutes it. If you want to hear God clearly, live a life that honors Him consistently. Let your thoughts, your words, your actions be aligned with His will. Then, even in silence, you will sense Him. Even when He does not speak, you will know what He means. God is not far. His voice is not distant. His guidance is not rare. But you must quiet your heart. Cleanse your habits and open your spirit. Remove the noise. Remove the excuses. Remove the distractions. Then you will realize that the divine voice was never lost. It was just waiting for you to listen. There is a sacred moment in life when you must stop blaming heaven for silence and start examining your own spirit. So many cry, God, why can't I hear you? But never ask, what have I allowed inside me that is drowning you out? The truth is that the divine voice is not absent. It is hidden beneath the noise we build. God's voice is not buried under the chaos of the world. It is buried under the chaos within. The spiritual ear becomes deaf when the soul is filled with noise, distraction, and rebellion. To hear God clearly, you must unclutter your soul. You must sweep away the dust that has settled on your heart. You must create inner space where only His voice can dwell. The quieter your heart becomes, the louder His whisper will sound. When you quit the habit of complaint, something miraculous begins to unfold inside you. Gratitude becomes your language. And gratitude is the frequency of divine revelation. A thankful heart is an open gate to the supernatural. Every time you give thanks, you invite God's presence to dwell with you. You begin to notice divine patterns, divine timing, divine purpose in things that once frustrated you. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start declaring, God must be doing something through this. And the moment your focus shifts from what is missing to what is meaningful, heaven begins to communicate again. The one who complains blocks divine flow, but the one who praises opens it wide. God's voice thrives in the soil of thanksgiving, because where there is gratitude, there is faith. And where there is faith, there is divine conversation. Now look deeper at the habit of rushing. You cannot expect to hear the voice of eternity if you are enslaved by the pace of the temporary. God moves with a purpose, not with a panic. The one who rushes through life misses the rhythm of heaven. Every step of divine destiny is deliberate. When you slow down and align with the divine rhythm, you begin to move with grace instead of stress. God does not speak to a restless heart, because restlessness is a form of mistrust. It says, I cannot wait for your timing. I must do it my way. But when you learn to wait, to be still, to dwell in patience, you prove that you believe God knows best. Waiting is not delay, it is development. In your waiting, God strengthens your discernment. He clears your vision. He matures your spirit so that when He finally speaks, you will not misinterpret what He says. Many lose divine guidance not because God failed to speak, but because they moved before he finished talking. When you are in a hurry, you settle for human ideas instead of a divine revelation. But when you wait upon God, the whisper becomes wisdom, the delay becomes direction, and the silence becomes the school of the Spirit. And then there is that secret sin you have tried to hide, the habit you excuse, the thought you entertain, the action you justify. Every time you make peace with what separates you from God, you quiet His voice in your life. Sin is not merely a list of wrongs. It is the fog that blurs spiritual vision. It distorts what you hear. It makes you question what is clear. The more you tolerate it, the more distant His presence feels. Not because God leaves you, but because your sensitivity dies. God speaks most clearly to the heart. There is nothing to hide. When you walk in purity, your soul becomes a clear mirror reflecting divine light. But when you walk in compromise, your mirror becomes dusty and divine light becomes dim. God will not shout through your sin. He will whisper through your surrender. If you want to hear Him again, stop defending what offends Him. Let go of the habit that weakens your spirit, and you will discover that heaven's silence was only the echo of your disobedience. The moment you return to purity, the moment you humble yourself and let go of the chains you once cherished, you will hear again. The same voice that spoke light into darkness will speak direction into your confusion. And fear, oh, how it poisons the channel of divine communication. Fear is faith in reverse. It is believing in the power of danger more than in the protection of God. Fear is loud, chaotic, and demanding. It drowns out the still voice of trust. When you live in fear, you interpret everything through suspicion. You start seeing danger where God has planted destiny. Fear closes your spiritual ears because it teaches you to listen to the voice of what if instead of the voice of God's will. The fearful mind cannot rest in divine peace because it is constantly preparing for disaster. But God's voice never flows through panic, it flows through calm. You must quit feeding your fears with imagination. Stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios. Stop magnifying the enemy's threat and start magnifying the strength of God. The moment you choose faith over fear, your inner atmosphere shifts. The noise subsides, peace settles in, and the whisper becomes clear again. Fear blurs revelation, but faith sharpens it. Fear silences heaven, but faith unlocks it. When you trust that God is already ahead of you, you no longer need to panic, you just listen and follow. Now let us speak about the poison of comparison. This is one of the quietest yet deadliest habits that deafens the soul. When you compare, you step out of your divine assignment and enter someone else's noise. You lose the signal of what God is saying to you because you are too busy decoding what He is doing for someone else. The more you stare at others, the less you see of yourself. Comparison is the enemy of clarity. It replaces contentment with confusion. You begin to question your worth, your path, your progress. And when doubt enters, revelation exits. God has a personal voice for every person, a unique rhythm, a divine plan that fits no one else. But when you try to imitate or compete, you disconnect from the frequency of your own calling. God's voice is always individual. He speaks to you in ways no one else will understand. And the moment you quit measuring your journey against others, you begin to recognize that every delay, every detour, every hardship was designed for your unique training. Comparison keeps you chasing shadows. Contentment keeps you chasing God. Quit the habit of envy and you will rediscover the sweetness of a personal revelation. But perhaps the most overlooked habit, the one that quietly suffocates spiritual growth, is laziness. Not physical laziness alone, but spiritual laziness, the kind that says, I will pray tomorrow. The kind that pushes God to the background while making room for everything else. The kind that desires divine answers without divine effort. You cannot expect to hear clearly from heaven if your life is tuned to earth's noise. Hearing God is not a gift for the careless. It is the reward of the consistent. Every time you choose distraction over devotion, your spiritual senses grow dull. Every time you delay prayer, you disconnect from revelation. God's voice requires pursuit. It demands discipline. It calls for focus. The spiritual ear is trained through repetition, daily quiet, daily seeking, daily surrender. The lazy spirit loses its sharpness. The devoted one becomes sensitive to even the slightest divine nudge. You cannot build intimacy without consistency. The voice of God is not discovered in the rush of life, but in the rhythm of devotion. When you make hearing Him a lifestyle, not an emergency, He begins to speak not only in your prayers, but in your thoughts, in your work, in your ordinary moments. Each of these habits, complaint, rushing, hidden, sin, fear, comparison, laziness, create static in the spirit. They are the reasons why so many feel lost even when God is near. You cannot fill your mind with noise and then complain about silence. God is always speaking, but His words are spiritual, and only the still can perceive them. Imagine trying to listen to the wind in the middle of a storm. That is how most people live. The storm is their habits. The wind is God's whisper. Until you silence the storm, you will never feel the wind. To hear God clearly is not about earning revelation. It is about removing interference. Purity of thought, gratitude of heart, patience of spirit, faith in uncertainty, contentment in destiny, and diligence in devotion. These are the inner conditions where divine clarity thrives. The more you align your heart with God, the less you struggle to hear. You stop chasing voices because His peace becomes your confirmation. You stop begging for signs because His presence becomes your assurance. The truly connected soul does not need loud miracles to know direction. One whisper from God is enough to move mountains. When you live in tune with His voice, you no longer fear what tomorrow brings. You walk with quiet confidence because you know you are guided by the unseen hand. That confidence is not arrogance, it is awareness. Awareness that God is near, that He speaks, that He leads, that He will not fail you. And this is the mystery. God's voice does not only guide, it transforms. Every time you hear Him, you become more like what He says. His words reshape your perspective. They awaken courage, cleanse motives, and strengthen will. The more you listen, the more you change. The more you obey, the clearer He becomes. Hearing God is not about receiving information, it is about receiving transformation. His voice does not just tell you what to do, it molds you into someone who naturally walks in divine wisdom. That is why you must quit every habit that dulls your sensitivity. Every complaint, every distraction, every compromise, every fear, every comparison, every delay, they are not small. They are the very reasons why many never rise to their divine potential. There comes a time when you must guard your inner world more than your outer success. The true battleground is within. It is not what you own, but what owns your attention. It is not what people say, but what you choose to believe. You must guard your peace like treasure. Protect your silence like gold. Because it is in silence that you will hear the voice that can change everything. When you quit these destructive habits, you make your soul a sanctuary, a place where God can dwell and speak freely. The more you cleanse the inner temple, the more His voice echoes through it with power and clarity. Some people keep chasing prophets and teachers, hoping someone else will tell them what God is saying. But the truth is, you have the ability to hear Him yourself. You were created for communion. You were designed to walk with the divine direction. But you must clear the channel. When you stop living in complaint, when you stop rushing, when you stop justifying sin, when you stop feeding fear, when you stop comparing, when you stop neglecting your spiritual life, you will begin to experience what few ever do, divine clarity. You will no longer live by guesswork. You will live by revelation. And revelation is the greatest advantage in life. It makes you walk with confidence where others tremble. It makes you calm in storms where others panic. It makes you wise in moments where others are confused. That is what hearing God truly means, not just hearing words, but walking in wisdom. Every great destiny begins with a whisper from God. But to catch that whisper, you must be willing to quit what blocks it. The divine voice is like a river. It flows continuously. The only question is, have you cleared your banks for it to reach you? When your life becomes a vessel, not a barrier, you begin to experience a peace that cannot be shaken. God's direction will come not as confusion, but as conviction. You will not need to chase signs. You will live in certainty. The one who has learned to listen becomes unstoppable, because nothing in this world can confuse a heart that is led by God. And finally, you must quit the habit of seeking signs more than seeking God. Many people want proof before they believe, but God's voice is not something to be tested, it is something to be trusted. If you constantly demand external confirmation, you weaken your spiritual sensitivity. God desires that you know Him so intimately that you recognize His voice without needing signs. His voice is known through relationship, not through spectacle. When you seek Him for who He is, not just for what He can show you, He will speak so clearly that doubt will have no place in your soul. When your heart is clean, your mind is still, your spirit surrendered, the voice of God will no longer seem distant. It will echo in every step you take, in every breath you breathe. You will move not by sight, but by divine guidance. And when you reach that place, you will realize that hearing God is not a rare event. It is the natural state of a heart that has been purified of all that separates it from Him.